The Methow Valley Interpretive Center presents Last Sunday for July 2020. For this Last Sunday presentation, we bring back a talk by Arnold Cleveland given at the Interpretive Center on April 29, 2018. Arnold is a full-blood Wenatchee Band descendant and member of the Colville Confederated Tribes. Arnold will start by playing his flute before starting his presentation.
Thank you. I was born in 39. So somebody asked me a while back, how old are you, Arnold? I said, well, actually, I'm over 80. I said, yes, because the day I was born, I was about 9 months old. You know, they say, about 9 months old. So the first year that you're here on earth, you start out from that day one and that first year. They don't say you're 1 year old or 9 months old. They say you're 3 months, 6 months. So after you've been here a year and 9 months, then they say, oh, now you're only 1 year old. You know, so you're going almost into your third year, really. So this goes on all through life. So I had a couple the other day says, oh my gosh, Arnold, that I've never thought of it that way. And it's like, well, that's part of my way of thinking sometimes. But anyway, I was born in 1939. I was born in Ellensburg, Washington. That should have been an indication at the start because they tell me I was born in what the county had. It was a county hospital, I guess. They're operated like the poor people and like the Indians were, you know, stuck out way out in the ranch somewhere. But I should have known then that being born in that poor house, I've been in it ever since. You know, I haven't found the back door out of there yet. So it was a good life. I didn't know much about it to start with until 3 or 4 years old, I guess, and start remembering things. But I was lucky that my dad, he worked. And this was a world that maybe I shouldn't say it, but I guess I have to. It's a world where a lot of the natives didn't get into that mode of getting up and going out and work. My dad worked, I remember he worked in pruning these apple trees all up and down the state, picked apples, and eventually got into these, somewhere right around Wenatchee area or somewhere here, they had packing schools, you know, they had to have people come in, they actually hand pack those apples and pears. He and my mother learned to do that, and then somehow or another, a friend of his got to California in Lake County, and in Lake County, California, they at the time were known as the world's largest Bartlett pear industry. I ended up in that field, but he went down there the year I was born. His friend says, hey, Mose, there's work down here, and so he went down and worked a year, and then he came back, and by then I guess I was about 1 year old, so he moved us down to California. From there, he worked in the fruit industry. We used to go clear down to Indio, California in wintertime, and that's where they did the figs and melons, and they packed at night, and they had water sprinklers on the old packing houses because I guess next to hell, that was probably the warmest place around. And us kids, there was a bunch of us, they called us fruit tramps. And some of you elders here may recall that name given to itinerant workers. Anyway, we were fruit tramps, but I had some cousins that we were all with, and there were several white families that were with us, and we all traveled together in one way or another. We each had an old car and the trailer house, and so us boys, we all slept out under the trailer or under a tree or something. But at night, when the folks were packing in the packing houses, that water ran down and underneath them packing houses. They were like the early apple houses here. They're built up, off the ground so trucks can back up to them, etc. But underneath that was all these huge mud puddles and cool water, and we played under there until daybreak, and then between us and the dogs, I don't know how we got cleaned off, but anyway, that's part of the memories. You forget that part, but you just remember playing in there. But we traveled from there, and then he would go to Chula Vista, and in San Diego area at the time was a lot of grapefruit, oranges, avocados, and some row fruits, I think lettuce and some things. But as the year progressed, we moved from one little town down there to another, and all the different fruits and vegetables, I guess you'd say, because I remember we worked in the asparagus, lettuce, cherries, apricots, peaches. Lord, I can't remember. And then we'd work all the way up to pears in Lake County, went usually through July and August. And then the end of August, we'd move up here and we'd pack apples in Wenatchee, Cashmere. Early days, my dad and them would even end up in Oroville up there working in packing houses. I kind of spent most of my time in Ellensburg. My grandmother had a ranch down there, and my mother was an alcoholic. And one of the early stories that my grandma told me was, after I was born, I guess I wasn't very old, but my mom left me with a family there in Ellensburg, white family, and they must have had me, they figured about 2 or 3 months. And my mom split. Don't know where she went, but she split. And my grandma happened to be in town one day and in the grocery store, and this lady come up there, and I guess it was me in the little cart or whatever she had, and she told my grandma Ida, oh, look at our new baby. And grandma kept looking and looking and looking, and finally the gal confessed that it was me there. So she took me back out to the ranch, and she had a big ranch, and over the years, growing up there was my home basically. But we milked, I think there was normally 15 to 21, 22 head of cows. And I think that's what turned me against farming, because I remember the old shed, and it looked like one of these old mud huts. It had a straw roof on it, and inside, you couldn't keep it clean, and those cows were not the cleanest. I mean, they'd crap and their tails and stuff, and we had to milk those suckers twice a day. So your whole life was built around those cows, And then on top of that, we had the chickens and the pigs and the horses, but it was neat. It was a neat life during my young years, looking back, because we worked with horses. Everything was horses. We couldn't afford tractors and all that stuff, so we had horses. And gosh, that was the neatest thing. And I remember I was 5 years old, and my job was on them old hay mows. Remember those hay mows that come and throw that hay up? And they hand stack that loose stacks. My job was to ride the horse, and I went up and tied a rope on it, went down to pick the levers up, and then back her up really fast, and got up there, and you had to do it just right, so when that hay mow hit them springs, it had to kick back, and you had to run forward a little bit and stop and catch it, and then let it down easy, So that's the first thing I remember doing. And then next year I graduated, and I was the mowing sickle sharpener, I guess you'd call me, because those sickles would come in and had those little rivets on it. And we had one of those big old wheels, grinder wheels, you pedal, and had the little water bucket on it. And boy, you'd get that thing going. Well, I had to take the rivets out and pop them out and put new ones in there. We run over another machine, put the rivets in there. After they're sharpened, had to sharpen them blades. So that was, I think that was the beginning of my mechanical career. Being out in the, I guess I could say, white world, working, packing houses with all these big companies and corporations and co-ops and even the individual. I got kind of a clue one year. I was working at this big co-op in Lake County there, Pear Co-op, and it was the largest co-op there in Lake County at the time. I was a packing house supervisor, and we had an exceptionally big tonnage year, and things got kind of mixed up when the fruit tramps started disappearing and going out and getting jobs, or kids not coming into the business, etc. So we started getting a lot of the grandkids coming, my daughter's, she's going to college this fall, so we want her to work for, a couple of weeks. And then it kind of got more like that. They weren't there to work to make a living. They were there because they wanted to make a couple extra bucks. Well, 2 weeks before going to school, they had to leave because they had to go shopping. They had to go get their hair done, nails done, new shoes. They had to get their apartment straightened out. Well, 2 weeks, and it's like, we got tons of pairs we got to run yet. So that 1 year, like I say, I was married to a Pomo lady, and there's a little rancheria there that we lived on. And it's a big place. It was 120 acres, and there were 33 homes on there. But a lot of the kids that were there, they were old enough to work in the back. But a lot of them worked for me. They'd come to the sheds and they ran the dumpers and the forklifts and the odd and end job. Well, the other jobs that were kind of upper class in the packing houses, we had a guy, head receiver. All the growers come in, he had to, take the info down and stuff. Then the other guy, at that time we were doing a grading system where they just take box out of this bin, the box out of there, and we'll sort through those. And that's how the growers got paid, etc. So they were kind of classy jobs, if you can call that in the packing house. But anyway, so then when these upper jobs started changing, the kids started leaving, and college kids leaving and stuff, it's like, man, I gotta have somebody do this job. It's just not something, not like giving you a broom and say, well, you go sweep this floor. Of course, we had a board of directors there at the co-op. Anyway, my boss, who was the general manager, he says, well, Arnold, do you have anybody that you can, pull over? And I said, I got some smart kids. These Indian boys from down, they were really, really smart mentally. They had a natural intelligence that they never developed because most of them barely got through the 7th grade and then didn't go to school anymore. But they were sharp. So anyway, I said, yeah, I can get these jobs filled and we'll get it done. So I started moving some of these Pomo boys over into these so-called important positions. And then one afternoon, my boss called me in there and he says, hey, Arnold, at the board meeting last night, these board members wanted me to tell you to stop hiring so many of your people. And it's like, what? And it's like these growers, they're all white growers, and they got truckloads of money and machinery and orchards and land, and they got everything. And we'd known them for years. We'd worked for them off and on for years. And here all of a sudden they're telling me, do not hire any more of my people. And it took me a long time to say, my people? What do you mean, my people? And that's where I really felt prejudiced, because at that time, in all of these growers, I knew every one of them. I'd worked for them for years, and here they are telling me, stop hiring my people. So I said, okay. And I went out and sent every one of them home. And of course, then, everything shed shut down and had to call an extra board meeting, and I don't know how much that cost them, but they all got together, and I told Phil, my boss, I told him, I don't want to go in there because if I go in that boardroom, the way I feel, it won't be very nice. So finally, they had to concede. I mean, it's like, you know. So we went back out, and I said, okay, I'll work on out through my contract through the season, and then when that's done, I'm out of here. Anybody here likes sheep? I feel sorry for you. Oh, I had a step. Do you want to hear that story a little bit? I had a step granddad, and he was Italian, and he had, I think there was 5 of those boys, and they came over when they were, I guess, around 15, 16 years old. They actually came over from Italy and went through that Ellis Island, got in, and they went to work on the railroads. Well, they worked their way across the United States, and I don't know why they decided that Vantage was a good place to get off, but anyway, they pooled their money, and I guess they had enough. They bought some acreage there just south of Vantage, little ways down the river there, and they had quite a bit of acreage. They decided to raise sheep for the wool, and that was okay. They must have had 3,000 head of sheep in there, but in the springtime, as the snow melted, they would get their sheep herders, and one of the boys would take so many sheep, and dogs, and they'd herd these sheep, and they'd follow the snow as it melted up into the Cascades. And then by the end of summer, they'd be way up in the top. Well, then fall, they'd all start coming back. Well, my grandmother's ranch there, she had 360 acres there, pretty good sized chunk north of Ellensburg. And that was one of their chuck wagon stops. So these guys would come and they'd park his chuck wagon there, and it'd take about 2 weeks for these herd of sheep to go through. And Tony happened to be one of the brothers herders up there. Well, for some reason, my grandpa passed away in 1937. After that's when Tony come through, and then him and my grandmother, eventually the boys decided they were going to sell their sheep ranch and everything over there, and they moved into Ellensburg and became house builders, movers. They moved houses. It was really neat, because if you wanted this, probably not this building nowadays, but them old houses, they could jack them up and they'd put these wheels under them and they'd drag them off to another lot or something, And these guys were all like little ants. I mean, they weren't big people, to start with, but man, they just get on those buildings and crawl underneath, and they're stacking these things and move those buildings out. Well, they decided to sell the sheep and went into that business. So Tony brought about 300 head of these sheep to the ranch. Up to that point, I had never been involved with them. But the doggone rascals, they, in the January and February, coldest months of the year, that's when they would lamb. And about 98% of them, you had to, you're pulling these twins and triplets out. And about 80% of them, the mother wouldn't take. So you made this bucket with these, I think there was like 6 nipples out of it. So you're out there, 6 on this, 6 on this, taking care of those little rascals. Oh man. Then you no sooner get done with that, they're just big enough, on their tails. Well, then it's snowing. Well, it's time to move the sheep up in the hills. And then, of course, then you had to get, you had to cut their tails, you had to castrate them, you had to shear them. And of course, my job was catheterizing them. You had all we used was those hot irons. You build a fire, get them irons hot on their tail, and they're kicking and screaming. And then you had to cut, and then my aunt had to pull the testicles out and spit them in the bucket and, shear them. I tell you, I just could not bring myself to like another sheep. Even driving now, Gail, every time we see a sheep, it's like PTSD, I'll tell you. Bad. Before I go to that one, I have to tell you the other one was similar, but it was during Easter time, and me and my two brothers and some of the other boys that decided to stay there with us during vacation time. We were on the horses and we went way back up above Omak Creek there, way back up in the back, and that's where we camped out. And then Sunday afternoon, we were coming back to the school and we were on horses, plodding along and stuff. And I started hearing voices. I could hear these. And as we rode along, we'd stop and I'd hear them. And it sounded like it was coming from the creek up. So we kept riding down there. And then pretty soon it was like laughing and talking. And it was girls' voices. So anyway, we got down a ways and finally we stopped and I was listening. And I told my buddies, hey, let's go see something's going on down. So we got down in these rocks and through the creek, and we, being Indians, we're sneaking across the land, crawling across there. Well, up there at the time, above the mission at Omak, they had a falls, these rock falls, and they were pretty good size that they had built there. Anyway, we got up to the end of that rock ledge and looked over, and there were 7 naked nuns. Because the water come down, and then this pool was, we used to go up there and swim all the time. You dive off these rocks and swim around. It was about the size of this room, maybe. We're looking down there, and it's like, God, that's Sister Esther. That's Sister, what a, and I sometimes I think the significance of 7, and because everything was 7 days in a week, 7 and this, 7 that. Here was 7 naked nuns. Rather than disturb it, they were just like little kids, Man, they were splashing in the water and splashing each other and pushing in and diving and just going around. We must have watched them for maybe a minute. Anyway, after we finally, it's like, let's leave them alone. We don't want it, because God knows what had happened to us if they found out we was watching them, So we backed up, went way back up, and we took the horses and we went way around. But from then on, in the classrooms or whenever, looking at one of the nuns, because all you ever saw of them, was the hand and this face, They had that black habit. We know what's under there. So, anyway, that was one of the fun times.